Good evening to everybody. My heartfelt and profuse thanks to General Saab, Mr. Ranwaka, and all the other people who have bent over backwards to welcome me here with so much love and so much affection. May I take the liberty of requesting you to join me for 30 seconds of silence for the terrible tragedy that took place day before yesterday. For us, it's a huge loss because I believe people have asked me, do you write fiction? And I said no. And many publishers came to me and said, why don't you write a book on fiction? And I said, no, I don't, I won't. And they wanted to know why, and I said, the kind of life I've led, the kind of life that God has given me so far, is 10 times more exciting than any work of fiction. That is why they say fact is stranger than fiction. I have led a blessed life. God has been so kind to me that I spend all my time now feeling guilty that will I be able to repay Him? Will I be able to repay anybody? Today happens to be my late father's birthday. He died many years ago. And since this morning, I was feeling a little nostalgic until I walked in here, and suddenly my spirits have been lifted. I must tell you that about 40 years ago, a very young man, just like yourselves, boarded a train for a joyride. He just wanted to have a little ride, and he thought he'd get off the train and he'd go back home. It just so happened that the train picked up speed and he could not get off the train. It was moving too fast. And therefore, when he couldn't get off the train, he decided to make himself as comfortable as he possibly could. And that started a journey. When I was very young and I reached a stage where I finished my education and I had to start a career, I was completely lost. I didn't know what to do because I had started to do a little travel writing. Nobody knew what travel writing was. There were only 3 travel writers in India. And we were groping. We were just going step by step without knowing where we were going. And I found, much to my discomfort, that the moment I did something else, I wouldn't like it. I never knew at that time, 40 years ago, that I was hooked for life. I never knew at that time that I would spend my entire working life doing what I've done, which is travel writing. I must tell you, my very first overseas trip was to Sri Lanka in 1981. And we were 1,100 Indians who were going there for a convention. And I was the youngest travel journalist as part of that convention. And when we landed up in Colombo, there was no hotel room for me. So they said, you're the youngest, we don't know you, so we are taking you to another hotel, and it's called Mount Lavinia. Actually, that's a suburb of Colombo. And they put me up in a hotel which used to be the Viceregal Lodge. And I do remember I was so excited. My room was huge. There was a 4-poster bed, there was a high ceiling, the bathroom was huge, and I could look down on the beach. And I was extremely happy. It was my first night out of the country. I was dying to phone people and tell them that, hey guys, you know, I'm abroad. I'm not in India, I'm overseas. But back then there were no cell phones, and there were very, very few phones. In the morning when I was having breakfast, one of the managers came up to me and said, sir, were you comfortable in your room? And I said, yes, I was very comfortable, thank you. And then another manager came up to me and said, did you sleep well? Were you comfortable? And I said, yeah, I was very comfortable. And by then, I started to think that I was an extraordinary person. I thought, oh, you know, finally my personality is beginning to assert itself. And I sort of, you know, started literally bowing, thinking that I'm an exceptional human being. Now, when the general manager also came to me and said, were you comfortable last night? I really started to think that I'm a VIP at that very young age. And as we were leaving to get into the coach to go to the convention, the manager came and said, sir, I owe you an apology. we were very worried about you because the fact is that we put you up in a haunted room. And I said, why a haunted room? And they said, well, you see, we had no rooms because of the convention. You were already kicked out of your room in Colombo. We didn't want to do the same, so we put you up in this room which was haunted, and we were very, very worried about you. Anyway, that brought me crashing down. I realized it wasn't my personality after all. It was just the fact that they had put me up in a haunted room. Now the problem is the next night, I couldn't sleep a wink. I was terrified. I mean, I kept looking at the ceiling, I kept seeing shadows. Anyway, the next morning at breakfast, same thing happened. They said, were you okay? And I said, no, I was fine, but I couldn't sleep. And they said, oh, no, don't worry. Now, this has happened to me 5 or 6 times, where across the world, hotels have put me up in haunted rooms, and people, guests, pay 4 times the price to stay in haunted rooms. For example, they're very popular with honeymooning couples, I'm told. And it reached a point when I started to think that I'm quite an exceptional human being. And as an exceptional human being, I deserve to be put up in a haunted room or given VIP treatment, to the point that if they now put me up in an ordinary 5-star room, I feel very let down. But this is the kind of life that I started to lead. And the reason that I didn't lose my head and my feet were on the ground was thanks to my father and my mother. My father was an army officer, a very humble man. So was my grandfather. The effect they had on me, and the effect my school had on me, and the effect my college had on me, somehow made me extremely mature and made me very realistic. From Colombo, they took me to a very beautiful place called Kandy. And if ever you go to Sri Lanka, I urge you, please do go to Kandy, because it's a beautiful little town in the hills. It's in the middle of the Sri Lankan tea country, and it is world famous for what is called the Temple of the Emerald Tooth. Actually, the tooth of the Buddha is in that temple. It's on display. So it's a very, very holy place for Buddhists. And after going to the temple, I had a guide called Tony, and Tony and I became very good friends, and he said, come, let me take you to the botanical gardens, and we went to the botanical gardens. And I noticed that Tony never stopped talking. He just went on talking. He was totally garrulous. And he kept saying, I do this, and I do that, and I show you this. And we reached the botanical garden, and he said, oh, Inder Raj, we are famous for 2 things, and both of them start with C. And can you guess what they are? And I said, look, Tony, how could I guess? Please tell me. He said, okay, one of them is coconuts. And we looked up and they have these giant coconuts. So I said to him, Tony, what if one of these coconuts falls on my head? He said, it's never been known to happen, never. And while he said that, a coconut actually dropped in front of us and smashed to smithereens. Anyway, Tony then said, oh, maybe I was wrong. Maybe it's something to do with you. Now, having been put up in a haunted room and having a coconut fall, I started to think that maybe there's something wrong with me. And I was about to say something, but I felt something nipping at my heel. And I turned around, and it was a baby crocodile. He had actually come, and he had actually bitten me on my heel. And I turned around to Tony, and I said, Tony, you didn't tell me there are crocodiles here. And he said, well, you didn't ask. So I realized that if you don't ask, you don't get told. Now, all over the world, whenever they take me to a place which has more than 2 trees and a bit of water, I always ask, do you have crocodiles here? And they look at me very strangely, but I tell you, it's better to get strange looks than to be bitten by a crocodile. Watch for that. I can actually watch for that. I started to flirt with my work. I was very young. I thought I'll do travel writing and then I'll take up a job. After all, I had done my education in a very good school, very good college, blah, blah, blah. But as I said, slowly but surely, this bug took hold of me, and I started to, much to my horror, actually enjoy my work. Imagine a situation where you begin to enjoy your work. I think that's the end of the world. I started to enjoy my work, I started to enjoy my writing, and I started to travel and write and travel and write, and that is what I do even today. I must share with you some of the things I learned in my life. If you happen to go to Scandinavia. In 5 of the 6 Scandinavian countries, you get to cross the Arctic Circle. Now, the Arctic Circle is an imaginary line, just like this wire. So one moment you're on this side, and if you take a step, you have crossed the Arctic Circle. And to make sure that people back home believe you, they take your photograph, they give you a certificate and everything. So I crossed the Arctic Circle in Sweden, in Swedish Lapland, and I was going to a place called Kiruna. And Kiruna is a world-famous place. If you get a chance, please go there. It used to be the world's deepest and largest mine. It used to be the world's largest town in terms of area. They used to say that if you take the entire population of the world and make them stand shoulder to shoulder, they would all fit into Kiruna. It's that big. But the mine is now abandoned, but the world goes there because it is the home of the famous ice hotel. And they call it the ice hotel because it is made entirely from ice and snow. They build it every year in October, and it melts every year in April, and then they rebuild it in October, and you have to book a room 7 years in advance. Now, when I went there with a group, I couldn't sleep at night because they have no heating. The bed is ice, the building is ice, it's a giant igloo, everything is made of ice. And the bed cover is a reindeer skin, and they turn you out, in a thermal kit. And I remember I couldn't sleep, so I decided to take a little walk around the ice hotel, and it was beautiful. It's a night which I can never, ever forget in my life. Because the moonlight was streaming in through the walls, and there was a sculpture exhibition on which I saw. Everybody else was sleeping. I stepped out of the ice hotel, and they have a church over there. I went into the church, and I said a few prayers. I say lots of prayers, by the way, because if anybody needs divine blessings, it's me. Believe me. So I never spared an opportunity to say a few extra prayers, and I said a prayer. Then I came out, and I went to sleep, and in the morning I met a gentleman who said that I'm a part-time priest of the church, and I'm a part-time barman. And I thought that was a very good combination, to be a part-time priest and be a part-time barman. You get the blessings, you get everything. And he said, let me show you my church. Now, I didn't want to tell him that I had already seen his church, so he took me there. And I pretended that, it was my first visit, but actually I knew everything. And then he said to me that we have some things in this church which you will not find in any other church in the world. Now, the thing is, very interestingly, that if your name has the letter ICE in it, then in that church they marry you off for free. You don't have to pay any money. But they don't supply you with a partner. You have to take your own. But your marriage is completely free. And my name didn't have the letters ICE, and neither was there anyone to marry, so I survived that one. But I started to write a lot on the ice hotel. And Kiruna is also very famous for what they call the husky sledge rides, which you must have seen. And when I went on one of them, I was reminded of where I live in Delhi. It's very close to the ring road, and the traffic on the ring road is so frenetic that I thought to myself, my God, this is it. But I never knew that huskies are very, very friendly dogs. They're very friendly. And they are always waiting for affection. So the bug came into me. But the icing on the cake is that everybody goes there to see what is called the Aurora Borealis, which is the northern lights. You may have heard of the northern lights. All the internet is full of them. The northern lights are natural phenomena. They are absolutely incredible, and you can see them in only 5 or 6 places in the world, and one of them is Kiruna, Swedish Lapland. And it so happened that there was a young Japanese lady over there, and I noticed she was very much in the family way, and she came to me and she bowed and said hello, and I bowed and said hello. Then she bowed again, and I bowed again, and then this happened about 32 times. I was wondering how long I would be bowing to her. But anyway, they are very polite people, and I wanted to be very polite. And I didn't want her to know that I didn't know her customs, because I was very keen to impress her. And then she was joined by another lady who was also in the family way, and she also bowed at me. And finally, there were 6 of them, all together, all in the family way, and they had surrounded me, and they were smiling at me and talking to me. And I started to think once again, it's that personality of mine. Finally, that personality could not be suppressed. I almost looked around to see if there was a photographer, but there wasn't one. They're never around when you need them. Anyway, I was very keen to tell everybody that story back home, but unfortunately I met their tour leader, an elderly Japanese lady, and she said, I hope you didn't mind these ladies talking to you. I said, no, I didn't mind. Hardly any lady ever talks to me, but this was a pleasure. She said, actually, we have a custom in Japan that if a lady is expecting a baby, and she's very kind to a stranger, then the baby will be born very happy and very healthy. And believe me, they don't come stranger than you. Once again, I was brought crashing down from here to here. And I realized it was not my personality after all. It's just that I was so foreign to them. I didn't tell anyone that story for 5 years and 6 months. I'm only sharing it with you because I like you. This happened to me all my life. 6 months later, I found myself in a completely different part of the world, in Israel. And I tell you, Israel has now opened up to the world. India has very good relations with Israel. When I first went there, I was a relatively young journalist, but I went several times. And in Israel, you have everything. Everything. There is Jerusalem, of course. There is no city in the world like Jerusalem because it is the cradle of 3 of the world's great religions: Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Judaism because they have what is called the Wailing Wall. The Jews go there, they write their wish on a piece of paper, they put it into the wall, and then they say a prayer. And when I went there first time, they said, please write your wish and put it in a crevice in the wall. So I had 50 wishes to write, and I wrote as many as I could, and I started to put them in. I don't know if they came true, but it's very holy. It's very holy for Christianity because that's where Jesus Christ was crucified, and that's where he lies buried. He was crucified in a place which is called the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and he's buried 6 feet away from where he was crucified. I've actually touched his grave several times. And it's also very, very famous and religious for Islam, because in the Mount of Olives, in the center of Jerusalem, is where the Muslims believe that the Prophet had descended to earth on the white horse, on the white stallion. So it's an incredible city. But more incredible than that is a region called the Dead Sea. And the Dead Sea is very remarkable because it's the lowest point on the planet. It's 400 meters below sea level. And the whole world goes there because you can't drown, you can't sink. And the reason you can't do that is that it contains 27 times more salt than a normal sea. So it's very buoyant, you see, and also nothing lives in it. There's no fish, no insects, nothing. That's why they call it the Dead Sea. But what has happened is that there's a world industry there now because they have this black pyroline mud. It's black in color, and that mud is supposed to be extremely good for rheumatism, arthritis, for the skin. And so the world goes there now for these beauty treatments. And I went also with a group. And what they do is they give you a mud wrap. So they wrap you, they cover you totally with mud. Then they leave you alone for half an hour. And then they come and wash off the mud, and then for the rest of your life, you're supposed to look very, very beautiful. That's what they told me. And when I was getting my mud wrap, there was a team of 4 people. There were 3 young girls and 1 young man. And they kept applying the mud on me, and they kept talking to one another in Hebrew, and they kept staring at me and laughing. And I'm a good sport, When people stare at me and laugh, I also laugh, I felt, okay, fine. And anyway, later they came and the mud was washed off me, and the manager came to me and said, did you enjoy the mud wrap? I said, yes, I enjoyed the mud wrap. And he said, did you know about the mud wrap? No, I had never heard about it before. But how was I to tell him that I had never heard about it? Now, I'm a man of principles. One of my principles is never tell a lie, never. So I just kept quiet. And he said, oh, I have a confession to make to you. So I said, okay, fine, my personality again, somebody wants to confess to me. He said, the thing is, I'm very happy to see that you're looking fit and fine and in good spirits, because what happened was that my team wanted to have a little fun with you. So instead of putting 4 kilos of mud on you, they put 8 kilos of mud on you. And we were a little worried that I hope nothing happens to you, but you look fine. And I said, what's an extra 4 kilos of mud for a guy like me? And later I said, Isaac, why did they do it? He said, you see, fact of the matter is that the girls were so thrilled to see you because they had never met a man whose hair was longer than theirs. And therefore, they wanted to have a little fun with you, but I hope you don't mind. And I said, no, I don't mind. Anyway, he said, as a gesture of our goodwill, here is a packet of black pyrene mud for you. And he gifted it to me. And when I was leaving, all 4 of the team members came and shook my hand, and they kind of told me in broken English that pyrene mud makes a very good gift to give to ladies. And one of them asked me, she said, oh, you know, you must be knowing a lot of ladies at home, so you should be taking a lot of packs. Now, I didn't want to tell her that I didn't know ladies at home. Why should I spoil her fun? So I bought 2 packs, plus the one they gifted me. And I thought I'll come home and I will gift it. But frankly, those 3 packs were lying in my bedroom for more than 1 year. And that made me realize that maybe I didn't know ladies after all. And that also brought me crashing down to earth. And I never told that story either to anybody for 7 years and 3 months. I'm only telling you because I like you. But the point I'm trying to make is that when you travel, you have to leave your home behind. When you travel, you have to leave your phone behind. You have to leave your thoughts behind. You have to become a global citizen. You have to adapt. I realized at that stage that strange things were happening to me. But I never realized that they were happening to me because of my physical appearance. Now you imagine a situation, let's say we are sitting in Canada or we are sitting in Iceland and you see a Sikh with a turban. You know, it's quite a culture shock for people. And on 100 occasions, I've been the only Sikh in a gathering of 2,000 delegates from around the world. So naturally, because of that, I used to get more attention. And I used to think that I was getting that attention because of my endearing, extraordinary personality, but actually it was just the turban. And that is why I put the title of my second book, Travels with My Turban. Because wherever I went, I got a lot of love. And that's what made me realize that you cannot wait for the world to come to you. Especially at your age, I would urge all of you, you go to the world. You take the first step. I took many steps, and I had very good times. And I'm very fond of wildlife. I'm very fond of Africa. I remember when I went to South Africa, they took me to Kruger National Park. And to make a long story short, we got charged by a lioness. Now, it's one thing to see a pack of lions on TV in National Geographic, but it's quite another thing when you see them in the wild. And that lioness started to follow our vehicle. I was the guy seated right at the end, so if she had actually charged, I would have been the first casualty, but fortunately we got away. A year later, I went to Namibia, which is the most beautiful country I have seen in my life, because they have spectacular scenery. Highest sand dunes in the world, 400 meters high, right next to beaches which are 300 kilometers long. You don't see a single human being. Absolutely fabulous. Over there they have a place called the Etosha National Park, which is arguably the finest wilderness area in the world. Absolutely stunning wildlife. So happened that we made a mistake and we were charged by an elephant. Now, if you see an elephant in a Tarzan movie, it looks very different. If you see an elephant in the wild, believe me, they look very different. They're very big, they're very strong, and they have a very deadly memory. But we got away again. And somehow, a few months after that, I happened to be in Royal Chitwan Park in Nepal, and my elephant was charged by a rhinoceros. So when this happened to me, I happened to be seated next to a lady on a flight from London to New York, and I said, Madam, I am so-and-so, and I'm short of saying that I'm God or whatever, I think I showed off a little bit. And I said, she said, do you go on safaris? I said, oh yeah, I go on lots of safaris. And I was charged by a lioness in Kruger National Park. I was charged by an elephant in Etosha. And I was charged by a rhinoceros in Royal Chitwan. And she said, Mr. Ahluwalia, please remind me never to go on a safari with you. And I instantly regretted having told her that. But later her daughter did go on a safari with me and everything was fine. But I started to realize that travel certainly broadens the mind. Of course it does. But when you travel, you have no choice but to be broad-minded. Because you're exposed to the world. It's not a question of my sitting in my little club, with my little group. Suddenly, your little group is the whole world. I also realized that by virtue of the fact that I'm a Sikh and I wear a turban, I was always under scrutiny, all the time. It's like, you see CCTV cameras saying you're under surveillance. So in a way, I was always under surveillance. But it did one very good thing to me. It made me realize that much against anything I had done, much against anything I had ever achieved, I had become a brand ambassador for my community. Because I realized that my behavior would determine how people would think about my community and how they would think about my country. So it made me a little more responsible at an early age of my life. And today I'm very grateful that that happened. But the legacy of adventures just went on and on and on. If you ever go to Australia, please don't miss the chance of going to a place called the Blue Mountains, which is right next to Sydney. It's only 1 hour's drive from Sydney, and it's arguably the most beautiful place you can ever see in your life. And everybody says these days the world is getting smaller. I don't agree. I think the world is getting larger. Because if it was getting smaller, how would you explain the fact that in the Blue Mountains, they stumbled on a clump of 40 trees, which they have now discovered are 1 million years old. 40 trees have survived 1 billion years, and they're growing there. They're called the Wollemi pines, and they were discovered by accident. If the world was getting smaller, as the word says, then how do you explain the fact that the southern right whale, which comes to the Bay of Hermanus in South Africa, they jump out of the water almost as if they are posing for a photograph? Can you imagine a 90-foot whale jumping out of the water, staying suspended for a second, and then going back into the water so that you can take photographs? I think the world is getting bigger. I mean, how would you explain that in South Africa, they just found a fish which has wings? It was lying dead, and when they conducted experiments, they feel that it goes back to the age of the legendary flying fish, which is of the age of the dinosaurs. So the world, I think, is not getting smaller, it's getting bigger. Maybe it's getting more complicated, but it's certainly getting bigger, it's getting very exciting, it's wonderful. If you happen to go to New Zealand, the original settlers of New Zealand were the Maori people. The Maoris actually used to live on an island, and they had to abandon their home because they had no drinking water, so they were dying. And they got into these dugout canoes and they started sailing out. They had no idea where they were going. And out of the 3,000 who set out, only 200 survived. The rest were eaten by sharks because they would row through the night, they would rest through the day, and while they were resting, they would fall asleep and the sharks would come and get them. But eventually, the ones who survived, they hit land, and the land where they landed is what we call New Zealand. The original settlers of New Zealand are the Maoris, and of course they've integrated very beautifully, and they have their own festivals, Makariki, etc. The worship place of the Maoris is called the marae, and a marae is very unusual because it has a very low round door, and gentlemen are supposed to go in first. And when I went over there, there were 3 ladies who were supposed to look after me, and they said, "So after you, please, you go first." So I thought, that wonderful endearing personality which eventually class must tell. So I thought I'll tell everybody that story. So I went in first and the ladies came later, and later they told me that is our custom. That's the way it is. So yet again, I was brought crashing down to earth. But the more I was brought crashing down to earth, the more I was learning. And the more I was learning, the less I was talking. Because I realized that sometimes just talking for the sake of talking isn't good enough. And I want to tell you at least one incident that happened to me. And it was a flight from Paris to New York. And I was seated next to an elderly gentleman. And 2 of the airline staff had come and escorted him right up to his seat. And the moment the aircraft took off, I pulled out my card and I said, "Sir, I'm so-and-so," and I gave him my business card. And he said, "Thank you very much." And half an hour later, I repeated it and I gave him another card. I think I gave him 3 cards or something. And I kept talking to him and so on, and he said, "Okay, fine, good enough," etc. And when we landed in New York, I was quite amazed, simply amazed to see, his wife and daughter had come right up to the aircraft to receive him. and he whispered something in his wife's ear, and then they smiled at me, etc. It turned out that he was a Nobel laureate, and he had been recommended for the Nobel Prize a second time. And I had spent 8 hours talking to him about, I did this, and I did that, and I go abroad, and here's my card. Anyway, his daughter came up to me and she smiled and she said, here's my card, and we would like to invite you for dinner to our home tomorrow. And I went to their home in Manhattan, and I was by then very embarrassed, because I realized that here was a gentleman who was so senior, so big, and I spent the whole night. I said, I'm very embarrassed. I think I spoke too much with your father. She said, no. We actually owe you a debt of gratitude. Thanks to you, our father fell asleep, which he never does. So I realized that sometimes being friendly can backfire, but they became very good friends of mine. And the very next day, I went to a hotel for a meeting. It was a breakfast meeting in a rooftop restaurant. And instead of the meeting, I was more keen to impress the ladies. There were lots of pretty ladies, and they were all very friendly. And so when we came down in the elevator together to the lobby, one of the ladies went to the constable and said, taxi, the way they do in the movies, and he called her a cab. And then the second one came and said, taxi, and there she went. So I had to go to another hotel for a meeting, and some of the ladies were still standing there, so I went to the concierge and I said, I need a cab. And he said, oh, sure, sir. He called a taxi, and I got in, and they waved at me, I waved at them. And the taxi went out of the hotel, and then turned, and came into the hotel where I was supposed to go. And I never knew that the hotel I was supposed to go was right next to the hotel where I was. But the damage was done. So 20 seconds after I got into the taxi, I was there, and by then I realized what had happened. So the cabbie, I said, what do I owe you? And he said, nothing. I don't take money from fools. So I felt very embarrassed. I never told anyone that story for 8 years and 3 months, but I'm only telling you because you guessed it. I like you. But then he realized that maybe he had hurt me, so he patted me on the shoulder and said, we are good, huh? I said, yeah, we're good. I resisted the urge to throttle him to death, and I left. And after that, I never made the same mistake again. I then moved to other mistakes. In Germany, once I went to the wrong town. They're all Heidelberg, Leidelsburg, all the bergs are there. So between all the bergs, I got confused and I ended up with the wrong berg. Anyway, and I thought to myself, all the Scandinavians, all the Japanese, all the Germans keep looking at their watch because they're so punctual. And I was not so punctual in those days, but I also started looking at my watch and showing irritation, etc. And nobody was there to receive me, which was a big come down in life. But I realized later, I went to this guy who was selling newspapers, and I said, I don't know, where's the phone? He said, maybe you have to go. So I showed him, and he said, sir, you're in the wrong town. But that story, I definitely didn't tell anybody. Imagine a travel writer going into the wrong town. But I realized that life is what you make of it. In Japan, a country I fell in love with, and I must tell you why I fell in love with them, because they are so proud of their culture. They are so proud. Prime Minister Modi is bringing in the bullet train, as you know. The bullet train is called Shinkansen in Japanese. It's the fastest train in the world. And I remember I was in Japan when it broke the speed record, and the whole country was celebrating. I mean, they were so proud that their train was the fastest in the world. And I had already had that experience with the Japanese ladies under the Northern Lights, the Aurea Borealis. So I started to like the Japanese, and they gave me a lot of love. And one day, 2 of them said, we have a surprise for you in your honor. And I thought, okay, finally the world is beginning to realize that they're dealing with a very exceptional human being. And the surprise was that they had arranged a fight between me and a sumo wrestler. Sumo wrestlers look very small on a TV screen. Let me tell you, they're not small at all, they're really big. But the fight was all rigged in my favor, so I went on to that. Now, I tried my best to back out. I tried to tell those ladies and the gentlemen that, listen, it's against my principles. You see, as I said, I'm a man of principles. One of my principles is never to fight people who are stronger than me. That's my principle. I have other principles also. My other principle is never do all the hard work and let others not do it. That's not fair. Let them do it. Be honest. Let them do the work. I'm a man of principles, and my principles definitely forbade me fighting a sumo wrestler. So I tried to back out, but I couldn't. But then to make up for it, they gifted me a huge bottle of sake, And on it was written, please don't drink this alone. It's just like, when they say don't try this at home. And I really started to realize that my life was very different from other people's lives. I started to realize that I was living in my own frame. I started to realize that maybe I should never have got on that train. But everybody does things. And so it went. And today, I find, I go to France. That was one of the first places I used to go to, the French Riviera. I had only 6 months of experience at that time. But I went to the French Riviera because people said the rich and the famous go there. So I went there without being rich or famous. I'm not rich or famous even today, but that's besides the point. Now, if you go to the French Riviera, Cannes is very good, Nice is very good, but there is this place called Saint-Tropez. And in Saint-Tropez is where the famous Brigitte Bardot lives. She was a very glamorous actress, and there's a cafe there called the Sénéquier, and she goes there every day for tea. So they told me, why don't you go there and you'll meet Brigitte Bardot. So I went there, but she didn't come that day. However, I made friends with the manager, and that was very good. So life has gone very quickly. I'm very, very terrified at the fact that 40 years have gone with me as a travel writer. It's almost very, very scary. And I must end by telling you that 10 years ago I started writing books. My first book is called Meet Me at the Border. When I wrote this book, the amount of advice I got on the title could actually justify a book by itself. Somebody said, why meet me at the border? Why not say avoid me at the border? Somebody said, which border? Anyway, I stuck to my title, and now all of them turned around and said it's a wonderful title. My second book is called Travels with My Turban, and I got a lot of advice, and people said, no, you call it The Turban Traveler. Or you just call it The Turban. Anyway, I stuck to my title, and all of them said it's a wonderful title. My third book, which I will actually release here today, because I am so honored to be with you, is called The Seek and the Snow. I didn't want to call it The Seek on Thin Ice. Why should I admit that my whole life has been on thin ice? Let the world figure it out. So writing the books has given me so much pleasure, and I would like all of you to write a book one day, because there is nothing more pleasurable. This is how it's happening. I could have been a doctor, but then I wouldn't have been able to see the great elephant migration in Africa. I could have been a scientist, but then I wouldn't have had an opportunity to fight a sumo wrestler. I could have been a shopkeeper, but then believe me, I wouldn't have been able to hand feed a great white shark. I could have been a golfer, those guys were, the guys were swinging around on that. But then I wouldn't have been able to wait in Sénéquier for Brigitte Bardot. I never met her, but at least I waited. So the world is what it is, Everything is just the way it is. Russia is still the largest country in the world. The Vatican and Nauru are still the smallest countries in the world. The soldiers are still soldiering. The dentists are still drilling. The golfers are still golfing. And I'm still doing the only thing I've ever done in my life. Dream, dream, dream. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Inder Raj Ahluwalia. Join me on my travels with my turban. Meet me at the border. Who knows, if you're lucky, you might bump into the Sikh in the snow.
He had opened up an Achilles heel. That as an old boy, he tried to compare his batch with mine, his gang of friends, not understanding that मैं अकेला ही काफी हूँ. But today, Mr. Inder Raj Ahluwalia has got all his flanks covered. He left no chink in the armor. And as you saw, not only is widely traveled, but he's a great raconteur. He has felicity in delivering his speech, clarity in his thoughts, and very precise in his choice of words. I think these are all things that young people like you should pick up and aspire to be. Whether you travel, whether you do anything else, whether you're a miner in drilling or a dentist in drilling, you must be able to communicate clearly, simply, and in a manner that the audience loves to hear it. I think he fulfilled all those requirements. I don't know if this was a coincidence, but sir, the young lad who introduced you this evening happens to be the son of a journalist himself. Though, of course, a better claim to fame is also the son of an old guy. Raise your hand, man. Which is the better one? Son of old boy or son of journalist? You may leave. After so many years, you haven't understood? All right. Now, many of you have had the opportunity to travel around the world, either with school-related activities or with your families. And many of the places that he mentioned brought back very happy memories to me. And but I must tell you one thing about Japanese culture. When I was there many years ago, I had to travel from Tokyo to Hiroshima, and they had booked me on a flight. So I asked my host, I said, look, you know, for us in India, a bullet train was unthinkable those days. I must have a journey on this. So they said, sir, if you don't mind, our people who are hosting you, they said, ROD budget only allows you to go by a flight, not by a train. Now imagine 20 years ago, if you're an Indian, would you imagine that a train ride is costlier than a flight? It was unthinkable for me. So I asked him, I said, why is that so? So, you know how Japanese are, they're very polite, and many of them are not so good at English. But essentially what he told me was, in a nutshell, he said, Shinkansen runs on time. That was a reflection of the culture. They valued punctuality so much that traveling on the bullet train was far more expensive because they said flights are prone to weather conditions and various other things. So we are not sure whether you'll be able to make it for your meeting on time. So the bullet train is what it is. And there are many people in Japan who commute in the morning on the bullet train, go attend the meeting and are back in Tokyo by evening. Much like that, he has said many things today from which we can learn, and some of life's lessons that you may learn. I'll only recount one or two, because the longer I stay on stage, the worse I make myself appear in comparison to his delivery. First, life lesson. If you don't travel, the world will not open up and come to you on its own. You need to reach out and see the world. Travel is essential. Travel is part of education. Travel is not leisure or hobby time or free time. Travel is full-time education. Whether you travel in India or you travel anywhere else. Number two, our school vision wants you to become global leaders. If you haven't been around the globe or known about the globe or known about different cultures and perspectives, you will never ever succeed. Yesterday you had Mr. Kapoor telling you about what is the German way of working, what is the Japanese way of working. And you will realize then that if we have to be the leaders of the world tomorrow, we must fully understand how other cultures work. What may be very polite in one society may be very offensive in another society. When you do business, if you say certain things with some people, it may be misconstrued. But above all, please understand that the world is looking at us because nowhere else in the world, in one country, do they have as much diversity of every type that you can think of, from terrain to language to food to anything. So we are a great country. The more we reach out, the more people will come to us, and which is why we encourage all the exchanges. And of course, sir, the places you mentioned, except these guys are too young, and even if they have ice in their name, they're not going to go and get married in Kiruna. But barring that, I think many of these guys have been to Japan, and they're heading to Japan, some of them this summer. Many of the girls have been to Japan, I know, South Africa, Australia, France, you name it, and you guys have been around. Anybody who can tell me what's the name of the famous Maori dance? The one which you might have seen at rugby matches. I wanted present boys to answer, not old boys. But remember, it takes you 30 years after you leave school to know the answer. Anybody else who knows whether Mr. Akash Pradhan gave the right or wrong answer? Should we ask him to show us what it is so that we know what he's saying? Okay, I knew it would take me much longer than Mr. Ahluwalia to get a laugh out of you. He did it in the first 30 seconds. Thank you, sir, once again. And what I request you now is to unveil your book, and afterwards be kind enough to accept some questions and answers from the students.
Good evening, sir. I'm Shilpa, and my question to you is that if that young boy in the chain was really you, where did it take you, quite literally and metaphorically?
I'm sorry, can you just repeat that, please?
If that young boy on the train were really you, then where did it take you, literally and quite metaphorically as well?
Okay, first of all, I like that question. When I was your age, the rage of the world was a band called the Beatles. And one of their famous songs was, "He's a real nowhere man, living in his nowhere land, making all his nowhere plans for nobody." That's me. That's where it took me. But the second part of the story is that I believe, honestly I believe, that I'm the richest man in the world. So now between those two, I'll let you draw the answer. I have led a life which is very different. I followed my passion. I put everything I own in these books, and nothing gives me more pleasure. When I sell a copy of my book, for many days I think I'm the richest man in the world. So that's where the train took me. Into Everland and Neverland at the same time.
So my basic question is that you've chosen such a comfortable passion. So what are your regrets in life?
You know, I took the liberty of mentioning that today happens to be my late father's birthday. He was born on 16 February. I wish I could say I have no regrets. But the truth must always be told. I have a few regrets. One of them is that I wish I could have spent a little more time with my father and my mother. I wish I could have been a little more patient with them. I was very good with them and they were very good with me. But I wish now in hindsight that I had given them more, because I never realized till they died that being with them was like gold. That is one of my regrets. My second regret is that I could have gone for other careers, but the thought was unthinkable. I've enjoyed myself so much. So the regret comes in here that am I now doing justice to all the work I've done in 40 years? I find now that as a human being I'm not being able to cope. My work has grown so much that I need partners. I need people of your age to take over one day. Apart from these two regrets, I only have one or two regrets where I let one or two beautiful women run away. But that I won't share with you. But that's about it. That's about it. Life is not about regrets. Life is not about cribbing about what we don't have. It's about thanking God for what we have. Especially our eyes, our limbs, our friends, our family. But I have liked both the questions that have been asked. I mean, I knew Mayo College is not an ordinary place, but I'm very impressed. So I have a few regrets, but I try now to put them behind me. It's time to move on.
So thank you for your answer. Could possibly one of your regrets have been not getting an opportunity to sit in this crowd?
You know, what can I say? The temperature is dropping and the questions are getting more and more intelligent and difficult. Yes, possibly. Possibly. I've been here 5-6 hours. in this wonderful guest room. And I do believe, this is the first time I've come here, I do believe that it's what I call rare and special times. This fits into that. It's a very, very good feeling. So now that you mention it, maybe it could be, but it's happened. It's the past. I would now encourage others to actually take the lead.
Okay, Abhishek, we got your basic question. If time permits, I'll come back for your advanced question later. Yeah, there, you talk.
Good evening, sir. I'm Krishna Singh Rathod. My question to you is, what inspired you to become an author?
You want the PR version or the real truthful version?
So both will be better, if not the truth version.
I'm beginning to feel sorry I asked you that. Anyway, one reason is that I would go to parties and people would say, oh, you're Inder Raj Ahluwalia, we've been reading your articles, they would compliment me. But do you write books? And I would say, no, I don't write books. And they say, but you see, my uncle has retired as a judge and he's writing a book. And somebody said, my aunt is a principal in that college, she's writing. I got so fed up of people who were writing books that one day I said, I'm going to write a book. And when I sat down to write a book, I realized I had the content, the material to write 10 books. That was one reason. The second reason is that I met a lot of people who said, Inder Raj, if you write books, ladies will invite you to cocktail parties.
Girls? Okay, not girls, since he's been harping on this. Young ladies, come. No? Okay, the guy sitting between the girls, yeah, come.
Good evening, sir. My question for you is, what qualities do you admire?
Loyalty to your parents, your religion, your community, your fraternity, your institute, and your country. I admire people who can wear loyalty on their shoulders. I have now started to admire humility very much. I, for the first time, have learned something about my own religion and about the sacrifices of the Sikh gurus. And their humility shames me. These are two things I admire very much. And the third thing I admire is when I meet people who are not rich and they have the courage to admit they are not rich, they go very high up in my estimation.
I want to ask that what were the first reviews that you got for the first book that you wrote? And was it something that you expected? But were you happy with the reviews or did you catch it up with your friend?
Okay, so let me answer this with a little twist. The first review that was done on my book was by a journalist who I knew. I used to write, and I still write a lot for Times of India, and she worked for Times of India, so she said, I want to review your book. And I said, you can review it provided you say good things. And she reviewed the book, and she said that it's a book for the bold. That's all she said. And actually she was right. So it was a positive review. I don't bother for reviews anymore. I don't go to journalists because I'm a journalist myself. But I'm very, very lucky that people have liked my books. And I'm very fortunate, I'm very blessed. Some of the compliments I get today are almost, they make me blush. And I can only thank God for that. I don't need written reviews. I know what I am, who I am, and that's good enough. It keeps me going.
Yeah, somebody, some young guy raised his hand. Get out, yeah. Get a mic, give out your name. Unless you don't need a mic, you can speak like you speak in the dorm.
So my name is Naman Srivastava, and my question to you is that in total, how many countries have you traveled? And in
Yeah. So there are 205 countries in the world, just for your information. I've traveled to half of them, about 100 countries. And as for my favorite countries, you know, I have many favorite countries. One is Japan, as I mentioned. One is France. I like Australia. But today, my favorite countries are the countries where people have adopted me. I've been adopted by families. They are my favorite countries because of the people. Important. Important or? Okay, so it's like this that, as I said, in life, if you have a value system for yourself, it's like a compass. A sailor needs a compass to sail. A human being needs a value system so that he can have confidence in himself. So some countries have value systems ingrained in them from the time they are 3 years old. For example, even America, the United States, has a huge value system. In everything they say, in God we trust. So I like countries which inculcate in their young people a value system, and I like countries where they are fiercely loyal. Loyalty means a lot to me because if you abandon your own, you're lost.
On top there, somebody raised their hand. Or is that the haunted row? Any of the girls that side want to ask? Yes, would you like to ask a question?
Good evening, sir. My question to you is that if you were to relive a moment that has happened in your journey of travel journalism, what would it be?
It would surely be when I was asked to become a sort of a flag bearer. Like in the Olympics and any games, you have a flag bearer, you know, who carries the flag. So I would say my most cherished memories have been when I have bumped into Indians in other countries, and without knowing me, they've come to me and said, look, do you mind writing this letter on behalf of our group? Because you're an Indian, we can ask you. And I've gone out of my way to do it because I felt that they are from my country, I'm from their country. So that happens to me all the time, you know. So I cherish those memories. I also cherish some memories where people just told me that you're a very strange man. And they never told me why they thought I was strange. But there's something about you, you know, so we'll become friends. So I cherish that. I don't mind being called strange if they become my friends. So I have lots of things I cherish, actually.
Yes, this young lady here. Yes. Yeah. Yeah, where's the mic? Okay, like that young boy, maybe you can try with your loud.
Good evening, sir.
Good stage throw, boys.
Considering that you've traveled all across the globe and alone, do you think it has helped you? Do you think it has helped you shape as a better individual?
One second, please. We'll just get you a mic. 1 second. Do introduce yourself and then ask the question.
Good evening, sir. I'm Disha. My question to you is, considering that you've traveled all across the globe and alone, do you think it has helped you shape as a better individual?
Okay, yes, I would say the answer is yes. When you travel outside your country, and especially when you're alone, one thing happens for sure, that you grow up very quickly. So I grew up very quickly because I had no choice. I had to. Also, I was exposed to so much wonder. I was exposed to people with such diverse cultures that it was fascinating. It was a fascinating journey. And my whole life has been a fascinating journey. So whether it's made me a better person, I don't know. Nobody's ever called me a good person. But I think deep down it's made me humble, which I cherish. My humility comes from my travels.
So my name is Parth, and what I'd like to ask you is that to someone who has traveling as a passion, what do you think enables a person to actually grasp, to actually explore a country or a region better, traveling alone or with company?
It doesn't matter whether you're alone or you're with a group. What matters is, are you willing to leave the group at a certain point of time and go and experiment the real thing? So if I've come to Ajmer, do I have the energy to go exploring it? Or will I just read a brochure and go back to Delhi and say I've been? So I think the ability to understand a destination is to mingle with the locals. The moment you do that, you come to know exactly who they are, and that's what makes the world very interesting. Every country has difference in cuisine, difference in dresses, difference in religion, and that makes the world quite interesting.
That's one of the young guys here.
Good evening, sir. My name is Inder Raj Ahluwalia, and I want to ask you that you give many examples of you thinking that you were an exceptional personality. So, sir, do you think was there any event that when you really thought, or it was any coincidence when you were actually considered as a exceptional personality?
Tell me, who asked you to ask me this question? Okay, I wish I could say there have been hundreds of occasions, but the very fact that I'm still thinking of one should tell you. No, I have, I've had a very good life, as I said, up to now. In France, for example, I've had people asking me if they could book a seat to watch me tie a turban, and how much they would have to pay to watch me tie a turban. And in the beginning, I used to be tempted to tell them, you have to pay me this much, you have to pay me that much. But to answer your question seriously, I can't pinpoint an occasion, but the very fact that I was adopted by the Japanese for a tea ceremony, which they never do, they would never take a foreigner to fight a sumo wrestler, I think speaks for itself. Something about me that they liked. I don't know what it was, frankly, but it's okay. I can't complain. I can't complain. I feel I am what I am, just an ordinary guy with a little bit of good luck.
My name is Inder. My question to you, sir, is that as you're a traveling author, what are the important things other than your notepad and a pen which you carry with yourself?
Your heart. Plain and simple. It is from your heart that you can communicate your love, and it is from your heart that you can recognize when somebody offers you love. That's the most vital tool. Keep your heart warm and you will absorb everything. That's what I feel. I could be wrong, but that's my interpretation.
Another question in the same stand.
Good evening, sir. My name is Chirag and I'm from 6th grade. The thing which I would like to ask you is whether you would like to wrestle a sumo wrestler or would you like to be charged by a lioness?
Tell me, is there a third option? No, I thought not. What have I done to you? I haven't even met you before. Anyway, I'll be truthful with you. I'll take on the sumo wrestler. Because they're so polite that the moment your stomach hits their stomach, they bow and they lose. At least that's what they did with me. Plus, I told you they gifted me this huge bottle of sake. A lioness is not going to give me a bottle of sake.
This young lady, I'll get back to you. Just one. Hold your horses for a minute. Who's that? Yasho?
No, Saurabh.
That's you?
Saurabh.
Saurabh? Okay, sorry, I'm not seeing so well. I'll get back to you, Saurabh, one second.
Good evening, sir. So you mentioned numerous times how you man of principle. So were there other instances in your life when you were at crossroads or conflict with your principles? And if yes, how did you deal with it?
I have made extensive mention of my turban this evening, and there's been a reason for it because my entire life was dictated by my physical appearance, you can imagine. On several occasions in other countries, people thought I was a king, I was a Maharaja. And as I said, I'm a man of principles and I don't like to tell lies. But I tell you, it's wonderful to be mistaken for a Maharaja in front of beautiful women and dignitaries. And I then devised a beautiful principle. I wouldn't say anything, I would just keep quiet, and they would think, not only am I a Maharaja, but I'm a big-time Maharaja. And one day in New York, I was giving a talk in Columbia University, and everybody thought that, and finally my conscience started to prick me. You know, a conscience is a terrible thing in life. People who don't have a conscience are always happier. So I started feeling very guilty that I'm not being truthful enough. I should say something. So when it went on, and people asked me, sir, which is your state and where do you come from and how many cars do you own and how many this and that. One day I finally blurted out, I'm the Maharaja of Kuchni Hai. And I didn't know that there was a young lady sitting there who was an apprentice journalist with the New York Times. And I didn't know that the next day she wrote a little bit on me saying, this Maharaja with an unpronounceable name has hit New York. And that was bad enough. But then there was a gentleman in the audience called Mr. G.V. Shastri. He was from Delhi. And he was a Hindi teacher in Columbia. And he came to me and said, Arey Baba, ab to bade, you know. So I said, Mr. Shastri, I never said anything at all. I was just, but it was quite, my conscience made me admit that I'm the Maharaja of Kuchni Hai. Until today, people in America think I'm a Maharaja. But my sense of fair play prevents me from telling them they are wrong. Why should I spoil their fun? Similarly, in the Arab world, they used to think I'm a sheikh. I have been asked how many camels I have in my stable in Delhi and how many wives I have. And I was asked once if I was, you see there was a Rolls Royce going up for auction in Boston. And the whole world, the rich and famous, were all trying to buy that Rolls Royce. It was a status symbol. And I was actually asked if I was going to bid for that Rolls Royce. And it was around that time that I was in the market to buy an old Maruti 800. So I kept quiet. And again my conscience troubled me, and one day I blurted out that I'm the Nawab of Kebab.
Yeah, Saurabh.
Good evening, sir. My name is Divyamna, and my question to you is that what inspired you writing novels on traveling?
As I mentioned, I had written so much on travel, articles for newspapers and magazines, that the time had come to put them in a permanent form. That was one. And the second, as I mentioned, I got fed up of people saying, oh, you write very well, we read your articles, but you don't write books. My sister writes books, my uncle writes books. I got fed up, so I started writing books. And as I mentioned, the third reason was I was told that ladies would invite me to cocktail parties. That hasn't happened. So between the Maharaja of Kuchni Hai and the Nawab of Kebab, the third part of it is missing. But writing the books has given me so much pleasure that I urge you all one day to write a book.
So what are the baby steps to write a book? Like we have clusters of ideas to present it, but from where to start, and so could you please?
Start the moment it comes into your mind, start. It never starts tomorrow. It has to start today, and today has to start now.
So the ideas, which idea should be, which incident should be first, which one should be in the middle, and one should be in the end?
you need not get into that in the beginning. Just put it all down. That will find itself. The directions come on their own. Whatever comes into your mind, just put it down, because the next day you may not remember that.
So, sir, if it wasn't for the boundaries around the world, you think all of us are the same across the world?
That's a good question. I think if there were no boundaries, we would not be the same, but we would be quite similar. We would be quite similar. Similarities would be there. Sorry, why did I give the title? You know, it's just, it appealed to me. And I thought of the title first before I wrote the book. And the border is meant to be a nebulous, invisible border. What I'm trying to convey through the book is that there are no borders. So that was my inner thought.
Good evening, sir. I am Anshtaq from grade 11. So I would like to ask, how can one see travel as a profession 10 years from now?
Okay, let me take the liberty of saying, forget 10 years from now. Let's talk about today. I was going to come to this before ending, because one day all of you young men and women will be on the threshold of a career. You'll be interested to know that today the tourism industry is the largest industry in the world, and it employs the maximum number of people in the world. 1 out of 7 human beings on this planet are involved and employed by tourism in one form or the other. It is a superb career option today, because it's very big.
One second, I'll get back to you, sir. And are you getting ready with your advanced question? Yes, ma'am, you wanted to ask a question. Mic for the lady.
Where's the mic?
Yeah, come and then sit behind her. When she finishes her question, we'll give it to you, the mic. You sit here only, we'll take the mic after.
So I have one question which perhaps I thought would like to have asked you. Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay. So with 40 years of traveling that you've done, and 3 books, your degree, and many more books to come, what is the message that you have for all of us here? I mean, is there some sort of guidance that you can give us, because you've traveled all over the world, not only within India, and you spent so many years of your life not only traveling, interacting with different people, seeing different cultures. So, do you have a message for all of us here?
Yes, I do. There is only one thing that matters in life, and that is the ability to sit down and dream. There is no harm in dreaming, and it is better to die with shattered dreams than not to have dreamed at all. That would be a wasted life. So dream. Think big, dream big. Remember, you didn't create yourself, God created you, so God, leave it to Him. You dream, He will put it into action. And the second part of my answer is that there obviously must be something wrong with me, because as I said, I have not made money in my life because of the nature of my writing. It was all traveling, freelancing. But yet I feel I'm the richest man in the world. So either there's something very wrong with me, or there's something very right with me. I don't think I will ever come to know. I honestly don't know. But you have to dream. You have to get out of the box and follow your passion. That's what I'm trying to do.
Did you ever venture out trying with running blogs or reaching out to the audience through the electronic media? That is my first question. And the second one, what do you think about the negative journalism? Journalists as a community are supposed to be telling us what exactly is the truth. Today we see in television and other media, there's a lot of negative journalism going on, which to promote a particular thing, make money and do many such things. What's your take on that?
To come to your first question, yes, I do write digitally also. The whole world used to ask me to write blogs, so I've started writing blogs. I write a few blogs. Actually, I have a small profile page on Facebook, which I use for my serious writing. And I never knew that millions and millions of people read it. They may not click on that like or love or whatever, but they read it. And I used to edit a magazine called Land and Myth, which I will now let go because I simply don't have the time. I'm working on the biggest project of my life, which will either make me or break me. It's a coffee table book on my visit to 50 historic gurdwaras in India. The book is ready, but I have to, So I do write digitally, but my writing for the newspapers and magazines and my books is giving me a lot of pleasure and also keeping me very busy. Coming to your second question, the less said about these journalists, the better. They are a disgrace and they are a shame. And you're very right, they've been bought over. You can quote me on that.
My name is Sarthak and I'm in grade 11. So, as you've traveled in all the continents, I just wanted to know about your remarks on human psychology as you have witnessed it.
Yeah.
So, as you've traveled in all the continents, I wanted to know about your remarks on human nature.
Okay, it's like this. I don't think I qualified to be an expert on the human species, but my reading is that human, we are very fickle. We are a superior race. That's why we rule the world. We rule the animals. But the fact of the matter is that we are also very fickle. Human beings are very fickle. And if you accept the fact that human beings are fickle, then you forgive people many, many things. Sometimes somebody says something very bad to you, and you get very angry, you get very hurt, you get upset. But if you say that, look, they are fickle, they are part of the human race, then it will help you get over it. I think if I was to sum up the human being as an entity, I would say enterprising but very fickle. Fickle, because we are susceptible to the elements. We are always talking about the cold, the heat, rising costs, the government doesn't do this. We never thought that we are supposed to do something. That's why I feel we are very fickle. We like to pass the blame.
Okay, I'm going to take the last two questions. One, the lady already has the mic here. And on this side, okay, you will get that chance. You guys have to wait. Okay, come.
Considering the fact that loyalty is such a pure parameter for you, what role has your own country played in your success and to what extent?
Okay, let me put it this way. I'll answer your question with a little deviation. I get very surprised and very disappointed when I travel around the world and I see that the Indians I see around, to me, they all seem to be suffering from some kind of an inferiority complex. I can never understand that. I believe that we are the ultimate country of the world. We have the finest scientists. We have the finest doctors. We have the finest armed forces. We have the finest educational institutes, including this wonderful institute where we are sitting. Make no mistake. And yet, we have a Gora complex. We have all kinds of complexes. That actually disappoints me and sickens me. Why are we like that? And why are we not good to one another? Go to Thailand and you'll be amazed at how much love they give to one another. Go to America. anything American, they will do. But somehow that's missing. So there are some things that are missing in this context. But I think that India has everything going for it, but we lack that little bit of national pride. That is why I harp on the word loyalty, because when I was your age, nobody gave me that word. I learned it on my travels. Your loyalty is your biggest strength. Your value system is your biggest strength. There is no bigger strength.
Okay, last question from our young photojournalist.
So my name is Nayan Bajaj, and I would like to ask you that you mentioned that you were the man of principles, and what were your other principles and how could they help us in our life?
Well, as I said, one of my principles is never to do hard work myself. Let others do it. No, I'm just kidding. Don't make that your principle in life. Because hard work is what will keep you going. Look, it's like this. Everybody draws his own roadmap in life. Okay? When your parents tell you something, it is natural for you not to have too much faith in it. I also went through that stage. We rebel without knowing we are rebelling. But at the end of the day, you will make your own ground rules. Remember that. And your principles will start to manifest themselves. I talked about principles again and again because I believe that if you don't have principles, then it's like driving a car without a map. You don't have a road map anymore. You don't know what you're doing. So it's important to make some principles. Whether they're good or bad is a different issue. But you have to have principles. So yes, I have lots of principles. As I told you, it's against my principles to fight those who are stronger than me. It's just against my principles. But I mean, having said that, to be serious, my first principle now is to just be myself. I don't want to tell you I'm somebody else, because I'm not. But if I tell you I am who I am, you may not be impressed by me, but at least I'll be at peace. So that's one principle that I would love you all to imbibe. Always be yourself. Never try to be someone else. It doesn't work. And remember, you may be better than the other guy. So it's a tricky question, but I think it's good to have some principles.
Right, may I request all of you to join me in expressing our appreciation for Mr. Ahluwalia, and then Bhavya, you can continue on.